This mounting sense of frustration on the one hand, prematurely declared success.
Pompeo is not getting traction on moving forward with denuclearization.
So far, there's really been almost no progress toward halting the North's nuclear development.
And so that's Bolton's tough line, but Pompeo's still trying to keep up a brave face.
North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho visited Iran this week.
I think it's a warning sign that the North Koreans are frustrated by the lack of progress.
It's part of a broader diplomatic effort by North Korea to try to get out from under the sanctions regime.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. In what appears to be a good cop, bad cop routine, top U.S. officials are striking a different tone about North Korea. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says North Korea is committed to denuclearization and that this is a huge step from a year ago. National Security Advisor John Bolton says North Korea has not taken steps necessary to denuclearization. So what is the underlying message to North Korea? Now my guest today, Mr. James Schoff, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr. Schoff was a Senior Advisor for East Asia Policy to the Secretary of Defense. Also joining us today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, President of the Mansfield Foundation and former Advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
My first question, how should we read these two different messages coming from Secretary Pompeo and National Security Advisor Bolton?
Well, I don't know, Jim, whether you would agree, but I think that what the administration is trying to do here is to both maintain the high-level political commitment to the peace and denuclearization process, but also acknowledging that so far there's really been almost no progress toward halting the North's nuclear development. They're still producing fissile material. For all we know, they're still producing more nuclear weapons. There have been intelligence reports leaked in the media that they may be producing additional long-range missiles. So this double message, we're committed to the peace process, but we need to see results on security. I think it reflects the reality of where we are.
Right. There's a lot of frustration, I think, right now within the administration, and this is reflected in these statements. On the one hand, Pompeo is not getting traction on moving forward with denuclearization. But the political reality, I think, leading up to the midterm election here in early November in the United States is Trump and his team don't want to force a crisis or somehow admit that the policy in the Singapore summit is a failure. So they have to kind of keep the momentum, however slowly going, without giving in. And so that's Bolton's tough line. But Pompeo's still trying to keep up a brave face. Mm-hmm.
How do you compare with last year? Last year, Secretary Tillerson and National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, they also showed different opinions regarding North Korea.
Well, I don't think McMaster and Tillerson were as well coordinated as Pompeo and Bolton are. I think they're a little bit more on the same page and they share information more freely. Pompeo also is a politician, which Tillerson was not. And so Pompeo is, I think, much more sensitive to this political reality and what Trump is thinking. And so you have a little bit of a different dynamic going on. But Bolton clearly is very skeptical. And, I don't think the U.S. is going to move off of this position and kind of give the North Koreans what they want.
And Bolton's position is no surprise to anybody. I mean, he was the hardliner, the ultimate hardliner on North Korea dating back 20 years. So when he was brought on as National Security Advisor, I think everyone knew it was to be Trump's pit bull. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Trump himself chose to engage at a high level, I think Trump will use Bolton as a foil. Basically saying to the North Koreans, look, if you don't deliver and give me some results, I've got Bolton waiting right here to slap sanctions on you, to mobilize international pressure on you. That's what he wants to do. So I will turn him loose unless you deal with me the way that you've promised.
Yeah, on that point, Frank, so it seems Ambassador Bolton didn't make any media appearance for a while, but this week he made 3 media consecutive appearances. So is this somehow connected? When the talks are not going well, then he appears on the media, do you think?
He definitely needed high-level clearance from the White House to make those TV appearances. So the fact that they turned him loose with that more negative message, I think does reflect what Jim is talking about, this mounting sense of frustration on the one hand. But on the other hand, the administration prematurely declared success in this whole process. And the last thing they want to do between now and November is to declare that it's broken. So they've got a very delicate line to walk.
Right, and it's even more delicate because on the one hand, Bolton is kind of the face also of Iran policy and the stepped up sanctions and tougher line against Iran, which is in part also a message toward North Korea. But we've got to maintain the close relationship with South Korea and the Moon government there, and they're trying, much more strongly to get this momentum going and to declare an end to the war. So there's added tension. You can't have too much Bolton, or you could also disrupt our collaboration with the South Koreans.
Yeah, we'll get back to South Korea a little bit, but North Korea's foreign ministry said that it accused high-level U.S. officials for not following the will of President Trump. And reportedly, unnamed official told the media that it seems North Koreans think President Trump is the softer touch. That there was one episode when Secretary Pompeo was in Pyongyang when the talks were not going well. The officials, North Korean officials, asked Secretary Pompeo to step outside and call President Trump about this. So how does this dynamic play into negotiations between U.S. and North Korea?
Well, I don't know whether or not the North Koreans think that Trump is an easy mark. I do know that the North Koreans are always very sensitive about direct, named criticism of the top leader. They're sensitive themselves. If anyone dares to directly criticize Kim Jong-un or his father, Kim Jong-il, I think they bring that same sensitivity to their foreign policy. So when the North Koreans are miffed, when they are upset about something, but they don't want to escalate to a crisis, they will give the top leader of the other country the benefit of the doubt and focus their criticism on lower level officials. And I think that's what they're doing here.
And personally, I think it's been a mistake to name Pompeo as kind of the single key negotiator for the United States. And I think he's been trying to establish a slightly lower level process or a working group with the North Koreans to work through all the details, to have him be the one to have to sort all this out doesn't make sense. And he's not, ironically, the most diplomatic person. We've seen the way he responds to criticism in Capitol Hill during hearings with Congress, et cetera, and with reporters. So I could imagine that relationship is a little tense at times.
In connection with that, President Trump offered to North Korea in the letter to Kim Jong-un that Secretary Pompeo will likely go to Pyongyang one more time. And Secretary Pompeo reportedly made several offers to North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons, 60 to 70% of them, from 6 to 8 months. Will he likely make the same demand again? And is it advantageous for North Korea to accept it this time around?
Well, I agree with Jim. I'm troubled that our Secretary of State is the lead envoy here. On the one hand, it does give you the potential for the highest level access in Pyongyang, including potentially to Kim Jong-un himself. But on the last visit, as we saw, Pompeo failed to get that meeting with the top leader. And if he goes back, I don't see that he can offer a different message. If the administration is expecting the North to hand over fissile material, I don't think they're going to back away from that claim. I wish they would, though. I wish they would focus on the production of fissile material rather than on the existing stockpile. I think it's more realistic as a first step to convince the North Koreans to halt the operation at Yongbyon and to halt all of the production of highly enriched uranium. That might be a more practical demand for Pompeo to have.
Jim, two Koreas are preparing to hold high-level talks to prepare for the summit again. Is another high-level diplomatic event, would this be helpful in breaking the current impasse?
Well, I think it could be, because frankly, we do need to broaden the scope of this dialogue, which is another reason why we need to get beyond just a Pompeo-Kim discussion on give me your nuclear weapons. That still has to be a part of things, but we should be talking about how to end the Korean War and declaring an end to that. I think part of that declaration, it's a two-way street of mutual confidence, so we should be getting something on denuclearization at the same time we're giving something politically. I think in the context of confidence-building measures and conventional arms, and that's part of the North-South dialogue there. I think economic cooperation between North and South is something we could discuss exemptions for current sanctions that would allow specific North-South projects to go forward, very limited in scope, but it would support that process. So maybe the North-South dialogue is an avenue we can use to kind of break through some of this logjam.
South Korea's Customs Service announced the results of its investigations. Is South Korea currently in a diplomatically difficult situation because of the accusations of creating a hole to the sanctions?
Well, they've smoothed it over temporarily, and I think we had a very reassuring statement from the State Department saying South Korea's on top of this and we're working with them closely, so we have all the confidence in South Korea. But if more evidence of this comes up, this really undermines that confidence, and we've already got evidence of other violations of sanctions going on with Russia and with China as well. So that is high on the mind of Pompeo and Bolton about trying to keep up this pressure. So hopefully we're okay now, but I think we have to make sure this doesn't keep showing up.
We're going to end this discussion here and watch video for our next discussion.
We think these sanctions are biting already, and we think they will continue.
North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho visited Iran this week. His visit came a day after President Trump reimposed sanctions on Iran. A British media called this the revival of axis of evil ties. Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho visiting Iran, is this to show off solidarity against the United States, or is this just a routine visit to a friendly nation?
I think there's nothing routine about it. I think we really do have to look at the context of this. On the one hand, it's true that Iran is one of the few nations really on the planet that has not responded to the call for sanctions and isolation of the North Korean government. So on the one hand, North Korea doesn't have many friends in the world, and Iran is one of them. So we could expect some ties. But a high-level foreign ministry visit at a time when they know the United States has pulled out of the JCPOA, when the United States is reimposing stiff sanctions on Iran, I think it's really, frankly, it's North Korea thumbing their nose at the United States' concerns about the North Korean-Iranian ties and reminding the United States that North Korea has options in the world. So I think it's a warning sign that the North Koreans are frustrated by the lack of progress.
Jim, Lee Yong-ho told the Speaker of Iran's parliament that North Korea will hold on to its nuclear knowledge because North Korea knows that U.S. will never give up its hostile policy on North Korea. What is North Korea saying this in the middle of negotiations with the United States?
Well, they've been fairly consistent, at least those around Kim Jong-un have been saying, we're not unilaterally denuclearizing, that we really can only talk about that in the context of a much better relationship with the United States and a more normal relationship. And so I think this is reiterating that message. It's showing solidarity with Iran that's in a similar situation and under similar pressure. It's part of a broader diplomatic effort by North Korea to try to get out from under the sanctions regime and the isolation, and it sees. I think it's not waiting for the United States necessarily. It's saying, okay, we're normal now. We're having meetings with leaders all around the world, and let's start building these relationships. And Iran's a good customer as well for some of its military capability and knowledge. And then also, this might be a good time to buy oil cheap from Iran.
And there's maybe one other thing going on. I agree with Jim. You know, the North Koreans would love to have a deal as good as Iran got. They'd love to be able to keep their peaceful nuclear energy. They'd love to be able to keep peaceful enrichment, low enrichment of uranium for fuel. So they may be signaling also to the world that the kind of non-nuclear weapon state that they want to be is the kind that Iran has negotiated to be with the international community.
How is U.S. strategy on Iran and North Korea different or the same?
Well, so far, the United States seems to be following under Trump actually a kind of a similar playbook. You know, talk tough, maximum pressure, but then offer up the possibility of high-level engagement. So I was not so stunned to see President Trump musing about the possibility of a high-level outreach to Iran, even at the same time as they are trying to ratchet up the pressure on Iran. So I think the Trump administration has been relatively consistent, but they diverge probably on the end states. Because, of course, North Korea is already a nuclear weapons state de facto, and we need to get rid of those weapons, whereas Iran is still only on the cusp of nuclear weapons status, and we want to keep them there.
Jim, do you think the Trump administration would go all out on maximum pressure on North Korea if North Korea continues to not make any progress, just like how it goes on Iran?
I do not think they're going to press too hard until these midterm elections. I mean, I think they really want to keep the facade of successful discussions going, and maybe we'll see some kind of meeting at the UN General Assembly or some kind of Pompeo visit if they guarantee a meeting with Kim out of that. And it's after the midterms that I worry a little bit, because we're in a de facto freeze situation now. North Korea has frozen its testing. U.S. has frozen its military exercises with South Korea. We can't freeze those exercises forever. So sooner or later, those are going to continue, I would expect. And North Korea will take exception to that. If they're not moving forward on denuclearization by after the midterms, and we're still stuck in this mode, then I think the U.S. pressure will begin to ramp back up. How effective they can be, just like in the Iran case, we're not as effective now the second time around as we were the first time around because other countries are not contributing. So we may have lost the ability to apply that pressure.
Last question. While we're talking about North Korea's friends and allies, North Korea has stopped receiving foreign tourists from 11th to the 5th of next month, and there are speculations that President Xi Jinping is going to visit North Korea during this period. How would President Xi's visit to North Korea change the dynamics of the current denuclearization talks?
Well, it seems to me that Kim Jong-un continues to try to secure his flanks as he negotiates with the United States on denuclearization and peace. So the North Korean desire right now is to have a declaration to end the war. China is a critical part of that. They were a combatant in the conflict, and of course South Korea. So if there's going to be potentially a South-North summit and perhaps also another Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping summit, I see that as preparatory to outreach by North Korea to Washington saying, look, everyone else agrees that we should end the war. So how come you don't agree? Let's get this done. I think that's the context that we need to view this in.
We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is the commemorative coin for the Singapore summit. The White House issued this commemorative coin in May and are now sold out, with orders coming in from around the world. With the original version now sold out, second and third editions will be issued. Frank, what's your reaction?
Well, I wish I'd gotten mine.
Sold out?
Yeah, sold out. But peace talks and the realization of peace are two very different things. And I think the administration is learning that over these last several months. And if they thought they were going to be able to abandon strategic patience, I think they've learned a lesson already, that patience is essential. There's going to need to be a lot of it if we're going to make any progress.
Jim?
My reaction is that the Trump administration is much better at marketing than it is at negotiating with the North Koreans. I think they really need to focus more on a coordinated strategy with North Korea.
On that note, Frank and Jim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Yun Jung.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.